February 2026. Newcastle have just qualified for the round of 16 after eliminating Qarabağ in the playoffs. That brings the number of English clubs in the Champions League round of 16 to 6. 6 clubs out of 16. On paper, nothing surprising. The Premier League is the richest league in the world. In 2025, it generated around 7.91 billion euros in revenue, far more than the other major European leagues. It is the league that attracts the most TV rights revenue, the most watched league, the league that spends the most on the transfer market. With such an economic advantage, such squad depth, such investment capacity, European domination should be almost automatic. And yet, over the last 20 editions of the Champions League, English clubs have lifted the trophy only 5 times. How does the financially most powerful league in the world fail to dominate the most prestigious competition in European football? This is the English paradox, but this paradox has not always existed. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, England dominated Europe. Between 1977 and 1984, English clubs won 7 of the 8 editions played. Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa. No other country has produced such a run. Then everything changed in 1985. The European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus at the Heysel Stadium ended in tragedy. 39 supporters lost their lives. UEFA banned English clubs from European competitions for 5 years. They only returned in 1991. The dominance ended abruptly. Just one victory in the 1990s, with Manchester United in 1999. 2 victories in the 2000s, Liverpool in 2005, and Manchester United again in 2008. And only 4 titles in the 16 editions since 2010. One constant remains. Despite its economic power, the Premier League does not structurally dominate the Champions League. Several arguments are regularly put forward to explain this, and the first that often comes up is fatigue. But when we look at the recent numbers, the gap is not so obvious. Last season, excluding the Club World Cup, Manchester City and Liverpool played 57 matches, Arsenal played 58, and Aston Villa 60. At the same time, PSG and Inter played 59. FC Barcelona played 60. Real Madrid played 61. Only Bayern Munich were lower with 51. In other words, the major European clubs play roughly the same number of matches overall. So the argument based purely on the total number of games is not enough to explain the European gap, but perhaps the issue is not the volume. It may be the density of the matches. Where the Premier League truly stands out is its winter schedule. In England, there is no real winter break. In late December and early January, when players are already physically saturated after 4 months of competition, the league intensifies with the traditional Boxing Day fixtures. During this period, clubs typically play 2 to 3 high-intensity matches. Meanwhile, Spain, Germany, and France are on break. In the Bundesliga, the winter break can last up to 3 weeks. In La Liga and Ligue 1, it provides at least a short pause and a micro-preparation phase. This difference is significant, because modern football is not only about the number of matches, but about recovery. The physical data are clear. Mid-season accumulated fatigue increases the risk of muscular injuries, reduces sprint freshness, and affects the ability to sustain high intensity in the spring. Yet it is precisely between April and May that the Champions League semifinals and finals are played. Boxing Day is not just English tradition. It is a compression of the calendar at a critical moment in the season, and that compression creates a cumulative effect. Fatigue is not spectacular. It is progressive, and it is paid for at the end of the season. That said, even this argument has its limits. English clubs have larger squads, deeper rotations, greater financial resources. In theory, they should be able to absorb this constraint. Winter fatigue explains part of the issue, but it does not explain 20 years of European underperformance. If England does not structurally dominate Europe, the answer may lie elsewhere, not in the number of matches, but in the very structure of its domestic league. The first structural element to analyze is how money is distributed. In the Premier League, TV rights are shared in a relatively balanced way. The gap between first and last is significant, but far smaller than in Spain, for example. In the 2024 to 2025 season, Liverpool received 200 million euros, while Southampton received 125 million euros, a ratio of 1.6. At the same time in Spain, Real Madrid received 157 million euros, while bottom-placed Leganés received 39 million euros, a ratio of 4. In the Premier League, even clubs near the bottom of the table have substantial resources. As a result, around 10 clubs can invest heavily, sign established internationals, and realistically aim for Champions League qualification. English wealth is not concentrated in 2 or 3 institutions. It is spread out. The Premier League's top 10 is economically powerful, and this structural difference has major sporting consequences. In the Premier League, every week is a test, because if all clubs have the financial means to invest heavily, it means any club can beat anyone. A simple example, Wolverhampton, despite struggling in the standings this season, can take points off Arsenal. An away game against a lower table side is never neutral. Rotation becomes risky. Resting players before a Champions League quarter-final can cost points in the league, and those points are crucial. Because in England, a top 4, or now top 5 depending on UEFA coefficients, finish is never guaranteed. Champions League qualification is a constant battle. By contrast, the situation is structurally different in France, Germany, or Spain, where PSG, Bayern, Real Madrid, or Barcelona rarely face real uncertainty when qualifying for the Champions League through their domestic leagues. That allows for strategic management, rotating before a big European match, prioritizing certain fixtures, managing physical load. In England, a club can never truly relax domestically. This structural difference is not limited to the domestic league. It is also reflected in the very history of the Champions League. Take Spain as an example. Spain has won 20 Champions League titles, but those 20 titles come from only 2 clubs, 15 for Real Madrid, 5 for FC Barcelona. In other words, Spanish European dominance is highly concentrated. By contrast, England has won 15 titles. But those 15 trophies are distributed among 6 different clubs: Liverpool, Manchester United, Chelsea, Nottingham Forest, Manchester City, and Aston Villa. English power is diffuse, Spanish power is concentrated, and the Champions League is not an ecosystem competition. It is an elite competition. It is often won through the structural dominance of 1 or 2 clubs capable of repeating success, accumulating experience, and building a long-term European culture. The Premier League has produced 6 excellent clubs capable of lifting the trophy. La Liga, on the other hand, has produced 2 historical giants, and in a knockout competition, that concentration of power can make all the difference. At this point, a more mature question emerges. Is internal competitiveness a strength or a handicap in Europe? The Premier League is probably the most competitive league in the world. Every week, the intensity level is high. Every away game is dangerous. Every point matters. But that constant competitiveness comes at a cost. An English club must simultaneously fight for the title, secure Champions League qualification, manage 2 domestic cups, navigate a winter period without a break. The margin for error is small. The absolute priority can never be solely European competition. By contrast, a club that dominates its domestic league too easily may face another issue. League One has often been criticized for being insufficiently competitive for PSG. Titles secured early, large points gaps, a sometimes less demanding rhythm, and the argument was clear. Without regular exposure to high-level domestic competition, adapting to the Champions League becomes more difficult. So the issue is not simply too competitive or not competitive enough. The issue is balance, and perhaps this is where Spain offers an intermediate model. In La Liga, 2 or 3 teams genuinely compete for the title each season. The level is high enough to maintain constant intensity, but the financial gap with the rest of the league also allows, at certain moments, strategic management. Champions League qualification remains highly probable for Spanish giants. It is never guaranteed in England. That difference profoundly shapes how a season is built. The structural question then becomes, does an extremely competitive domestic league truly optimize European performance, or does it make sustained dominance harder to repeat over the long term? But since the 2024 to 2025 season, the Champions League format has changed. The group stage has disappeared, replaced by an expanded league phase. Mechanically, this has benefited the Premier League. For the 2025 to 2026 season, 6 English clubs are present in the round of 16. Statistically, that is significant. The more representatives a country has in the knockout stage, the higher the probability that one of them reaches the final. English depth then becomes an advantage. Another effect of the new format, clubs from the same country cannot face each other during the league phase. They therefore avoid early internal clashes. They accumulate more UEFA coefficient points, and they more easily secure additional spots for future seasons. A potentially virtuous cycle. But one question remains. Does depth compensate for the absence of a structural super-dominant club? Having 6 strong teams increases probability, But history shows that the Champions League is often won by a structurally superior club capable of imposing itself over several seasons. This edition will therefore serve as a full-scale test, and we will see whether this configuration is sufficient to convert English financial power into sustained European dominance. The Premier League may well be the strongest league in the world, but that is not the real question. The real question is whether it is structurally built to dominate Europe. The new format gives it more representatives, more probability, more chances, but does English competitiveness function as an advantage or as its main obstacle when it comes to ruling the Champions League? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, consider liking it, boosting it, and subscribing so you don't miss the next analyses. See you soon. Bye.